This month, we have a guest speaker, Dr. Chris Stauffer, who is an assistant professor of psychiatry at OHSU. Dr. Stauffer is involved in research on psilocybin, MDMA, and oxytocin, and is currently conducting several clinical trials. He'll be speaking about his work and what's going on with OHSU and the VA. And he's joined by two members of his team. So we have Dan Friedrich and Donny Reed. And so without any further ado, Chris Stauffer.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks for having us here. I'm super excited to talk about what we're doing, and I'll probably be pretty brief on my part, just because I think it's more interesting to hear from Donny and Dan and their stories. I'm a psychiatrist, addiction medicine doctor. I've been full-time at the VA since 2014. I was originally at the San Francisco VA, and I did a pretty good part of my training for the 8 years before that with the VA as well. And I think focusing my kind of clinical work mostly on addiction and substance use disorders, the VA, out of all the systems that I worked in, offered the most comprehensive treatment for addiction. And then working with addiction, I realized that almost every single time there was underlying PTSD, and the addiction was just a symptom of the PTSD. And so I discovered MDMA therapy and psilocybin therapy like 2010. There was a MAPS conference, and I'd had my own experiences before that, but I had never heard about kind of the 50s and 60s psychedelic assisted therapy research. And when I learned about it, it made a lot of sense, because I was pretty disappointed with the lack of options we had to treat mental health disorders. And so I essentially dedicated my career to making psychedelic assisted psychotherapy accessible. And initially I spoke to the people at the San Francisco VA and funders and central office, and they wanted nothing to do with it. And so I started working at the affiliate university in San Francisco, University of California, San Francisco. Worked on phase 2 and phase 3 MAP studies of MDMA assisted therapy for PTSD. I worked on a psilocybin trial. It was psilocybin group therapy for long-term AIDS survivors. And then right before the pandemic started, I moved to Portland. And when I took my job here, I guess before I took my job here, they invited me to come give a talk about the research that I wanted to do kind of like an audition. And I decided to talk about MDMA and psilocybin research, even though all of my mentors were like, don't talk to the VA about that. They're not going to give you the job. But they did give me the job. And so I moved here with the understanding that I would be starting up a psychedelic research program at the Portland VA. And there are a few VA researchers doing research with MDMA and psilocybin. For the most part, they're housed in their academic affiliate, but we're unusual in that our research program and our treatment space is within the VA. It's on the Vancouver campus of the Portland VA. And we have 2 trials going on right now. One is psilocybin assisted therapy for veterans with methamphetamine use disorder. And it's all veterans who are living on campus in a residential treatment program. And it's nice because we aren't recruiting necessarily in the way that a lot of studies recruit. We're not it's not open to anybody. They have to get into the substance abuse treatment program. And then from there, they have to decide that they want inpatient treatment and get admitted to the inpatient or the residential treatment program. And then from there, if we think that they're eligible, we'll talk to them. And so far, we've enrolled 4 people. And I think one of the awesome parts of our treatment model is we are working with veterans. And so Donny and Dan are both peer integration specialists. And so they're trained to do psychedelic work. And then they pair with a clinician, and we work in dyads. And so I'm sure they can tell you more about their work. And then the other study that's about to start up is MDMA assisted group therapy for veterans with PTSD. And that'll take place in the Vancouver as well. I guess the only other thing I would say is, so we're doing the traditional drug development model within the VA system. And so it's separate from what's going on in Oregon with Measure 109. And I think that there are, pros and cons to both models. I think it feels important for me to continue to do this in the VA and try to get these treatments implemented into the VA, primarily for access. And we're in contact with some of the groups that are taking veterans outside of the country, like Heroic Hearts Project and Veterans of War. And I think they're doing amazing work. I know that all of them also wish that they didn't have to take people out of the country. And so I think many of them are planning to build treatment facilities, psilocybin facilities in Oregon once they're able to. But I think right now we're kind of focused on getting the VA to acknowledge and put funds toward doing this research. The VA hasn't paid for any of the research that we're doing. We had to bring in funds from the outside. And essentially they were telling us, no, you can't do this. No, you can't do this. And then some of us just started to do it anyway. And now we kind of have their ear. I spoke to some people from central office who fund research, and they said that the person who I spoke to 5 years ago said, don't ever ask me that again. Basically said on Monday that she's convinced that we need to do this research at the VA, but she needs to change some more minds kind of on the committee internally. So things are changing, and things are I feel like we're just about to reach a tipping point, and I don't know what that path will look like moving forward. I think already in our psilocybin trial, we've come up against the system. It's a system that's not used to this type of work. And so especially having people in a residential treatment program, there are aspects of how care is kind of delivered at the VA that don't necessarily jive with what we're doing in a psilocybin assisted psychotherapy. But I think if we just continue to have these conversations and continue to have these meetings and keep kind of moving the dial in that direction, it'll be positive. And then as far as Measure 109, I think I saw Matthew Hicks was on. I don't know if he still is. But he's a veteran. I think he's going to have a psilocybin training program, a psilocybin certification program. But we can maybe talk more about that after we hear from Donny and Dan.
Hi, all. My name's Dan. As Chris said, I'm a veteran. I've served in the Marines for 8 years. I invaded Iraq in 2003, and experienced PTSD through that experience, and also went through my own journey with meth addiction as well. And while I was doing peer support in the traditional context, I really was looking for a way to expand on this. And I was also always having this question of, can we do more for meth addiction and meth recovery? Like, what are some options that we have? It just seemed like, in my own recovery process and things like that, I was like, is there a way to sit with this in more generative and in a more nurturing way? And then I was just kind of hanging out one day and found Chris and started talking to him, and really got excited about doing this work and doing this space. And I think my experience thus far with the psilocybin assisted therapies for meth addiction has just been profound. I mean, as a peer support specialist, being able to not only do this work and also collaborate with a team of clinicians that are very passionate about what they do. Just in the early days of the study that I've been involved in, learning how to hold space in a really beautiful way, in a way that I always felt drawn to, which was to just really walk with someone and to be with them as they're starting to gain their truth and their insight and what's going on in their lives. And feeling my own recovery sort of happened in that process too has been a lot of fun. It's been really exciting. And I know that, the encounters that I've had thus far with veterans that are going through this work, that I thought about the ways that I'd sort of underground my own recovery from meth addiction and PTSD with these with both MDMA and also psilocybin. I just kind of thought to myself, like, wow, this is really cool to have it be something that is being studied, be something that has a therapeutic framework to, and especially the integration piece. And so I think what I really want to just say is that I feel like the importance of having peers doing this work with someone has just been identified very quickly in this research, as far as, sitting with someone and being there and being a grounding agent and allowing someone to let go and move into their truth and really call that truth out and have it being reinforced in the sort of collaborative thing that Donny and I do with someone and build a relationship and have that be sort of the safe space to just whatever comes up, whatever's present for them, and what comes out in that truth, it's okay. Whatever it looks like, if it looks messy, whatever, it's okay. Like it's okay to be in that space, and it's okay to do this work, and it's okay to heal. And so I'm really excited about, what's going to happen next. I would love to say a lot more. I'm just kind of wondering like what the parameters are as far as talking about that too much. But if I could leave you all with anything, it's just that I have this, full belief in the work that we're doing and the potential that it has for people in their recovery. It's a beautiful, wonderful thing. It's full of love and compassion. And I'm very grateful to be here. I'll turn it over to Donny.
Thanks, Dan. My name's Donny Reed. I'm a veteran as well. I'm a Iraq veteran, Army. I was a tanker. I was there in 2005. Is where I got a lot of my trauma from. And I did a lot of my own work in isolation, alone, feeling totally unsupported. And I moved to Washington from Idaho when Washington legalized marijuana, because marijuana was one of the only things that really helped me to work on my stuff. And I didn't want to go to jail. So I was like, I'll go to Washington where I can start deepening into this work. And I found psychedelics as a part of that and really gained massive benefits from that. But what I want to say is that like Chris and Dan are incredible. Like I've known Dan for 4 or 5 years now. We started this work together as peers. And he's just like been a rock star friend, support person. Like when he says he's learning how to hold space, like he was holding space way before he learned how to hold space. So I was really grateful for your friendship and partnership and all of that. Chris is my facilitating partner in the psilocybin research, and working with him is just out of, like, it blows my mind every time we sit with someone. Like you're just like, you don't say enough. Like I need to say this. I'm pretty sure you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like this. So Chris and I had the first participant in the psilocybin, and that was the first time that psilocybin had ever been given on a VA campus. Correct?
I think there have been some psilocybin trials, but not psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy in the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the first time psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy, first time in the world that meth has ever been studied, or psilocybin's ever been studied to treat meth addiction, and first time that there's ever been a peer therapist doing the work. So probably first time in Washington, which so it's pretty incredible. Like when we did that and all that kind of landed, like it was really profound. And that's because of like all of the hard, irritating work that Chris has had to do to fight the system or integrate with the system. So because without him, I wouldn't be able to do this. I've been volunteering my time for 4 years at the VA, just doing regular spiritual care, because I know how necessary it is. And I know how much it's helped me. I know the benefits I found. And if I can give people even tidbits of what I've been able to work out in my own life, like I want to do that. And luckily I'm in a position in my life where volunteering my time is something that I've been able to do. But really think that this work is very powerful. Like what I would say about it is, what we are beginning to see is that what happens is that we're not really treating addictions or substance use. We're treating, like, we're able to find the traumas that cause someone to want to use that medicine in the first place. And a lot of it might be considered escape medicine, right? Like they're in pain and they don't want to be in pain anymore. And they don't know how to process that pain. And so they escape with other substances that ultimately cause them harm. And so by going in and doing this work with them, these medicines are able to open up these spaces. And with the support of people like Chris and Dan and myself and the other facilitators, then we're able to meet those traumas kind of head on and access them, see what the causes are, and help process through those things so that the synapses change, all of the programmed behaviors change, and they don't want to go back to those things. Like they see what caused that, and the shift is somewhere else. Now, whether or not that's long-term effect, we have yet to find that out. But at least in the verbiage, we're seeing stark differences in how people communicate with us from the beginning of the study to the end of the study, or the beginning of their treatment to the end of their treatment. And so it's really powerful. And, knowing that the residential treatment programs right now with meth addiction inside the VA, which is I know Chris has said this and I agree, they do really good work. Like they're doing their very best to help these individuals that are struggling with substance use. And they have a single-digit percentage of non-use after that, of like actual recovery. So 100 people, less than 10 of them don't use again. And so if we're able to make any impact in that, it's worth it. And I believe we'll probably make a pretty powerful impact with that. So as a veteran who's benefited so much from psychedelics, I know the power of entering my own space, getting in touch with my traumas, with my mind, with my spiritual self, and the things that have been able to open up for me, the work that I've been able to do. And I feel like every interaction that I have in my life, every relationship that I have in my life, I have and is influenced by my work with psychedelics. Like I would not be here today having these conversations, not because of the actual factual things of if I didn't use psychedelics, I wouldn't be at a psychedelic group. But at the same time, like I wouldn't even be able to be this type of person. So I'm really grateful to psychedelics medicine, plant medicine, for what it has helped me to do. And
only empathize with just how beneficial just psychedelics has been in my own life. I can't really speak to meth addiction, but being diagnosed with PTSD, it was almost like an epiphany, so to speak. Just like, oh my gosh, there's like a way to treat PTSD, which it was just something that originally was like, if that's what you have, if you're diagnosed with PTSD, then call it a day, because you're doomed to a life of drinking and like just having bad relationships with people. And I was very negative about it. When I encountered psychedelics in that setting, I was like, oh my gosh, we might actually see like just droves of people getting out of their diagnosis of PTSD. We might actually have a chance of seeing a lot of healing, post-traumatic growth within our lifetime, which that's total 180 from what I was actually originally thinking. This might just be from my enthusiasm asking, but like with that, all that being said, is there, I can only imagine that there's going to be so many benefits seen in these studies. Do you guys have any context or any type of just potential projection of like when would see this start to be more widespread throughout the US, at least in other VAs for veterans? Because I could see this being a treatment for veterans a lot quicker than it would be for the public as far as the US is concerned.
Yeah, I know. So right now, it sounds like the VA is ready to start funding research. Research is not really great for access. Like we're gonna see and treat 15 people with psilocybin over 2 years. But essentially what they're saying is once FDA approval happens, that kind of opens the gate for them to start implementing it clinically. And it looks like MDMA assisted psychotherapy will be FDA approved first. The projection right now is the beginning of 2024, and psilocybin therapy will probably be a couple years after that. And then, I think it's smart of them, but right now the talk is that it'll roll out slowly. And I think, it takes such a long time to get these teams together, because I think in my mind that the treatment isn't the psychedelic, it's really the relationship building, the community. And so I think it's important, like for our team, we build a lot of trust, we build a lot of cohesion amongst our teams, and so far all the participants have commented on that, and that being a healing aspect of the work we're doing is just our relationships with each other. And we have good relationships with people in the RRTP who are also MAPS trained and so understand what we're doing, and are able to kind of facilitate. So I think from what I've heard, sites like our site, the Portland VA and the Bronx VA, who's doing some MDMA research, will be pilot sites. And then from there, we'll start to train other VAs. And this all will likely happen after FDA approval.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I have such high hopes for psilocybin and MDMA specifically. I just definitely poorly scheduled, if you ask me, as far as like the federal scheduling system. But I can't help but feel that as far as, I don't think that the political left would be very hard to sway into being on the side of rescheduling these things. But I feel like the political right that might be against these just from the first go, just from hearing about it, would be swayed once they start seeing the results of how many veterans are actually benefiting from this. And I see this being a snowball that's already began to start heading its way downhill.
Yeah, and interestingly, you know, some of the veterans organizations, veteran psychedelic organizations that take veterans outside of the country, one of them is run by a couple who are pretty right politically, but they just believe in this as a treatment. So it's nice that it's like fairly bipartisan. And I think, you know, the results from veterans and the testimonials from veterans who are in part of these programs is a big part of why it's so bipartisan.
Sure, yeah, and just I can't wait that there's just more results from these studies to come up, because I feel that it just would be hard to deny at that point.
I actually had a question for you, Chris. You were talking about an upcoming MDMA assisted group therapy. And I was curious how you guys were structuring that experiment. Like, what is that going to look like?
Yeah, so the protocol, and I can tell you the protocol of I see somebody had a question about milligrams and kind of the protocol for the psilocybin trial as well. But for the group study, most of the visits will be in a group, and we'll have 4 prep visits. One of those prep visits will be individual, and then 2 MDMA sessions like a month apart. The first MDMA session will be individual, so just like one veteran with 2 facilitators. And then the second MDMA session will be in a group together, cohort of 6. And then all the integration, so there will be, I think, 4 integration sessions after each MDMA session, and those will all be conducted in a group, except for the one right after the individual MDMA session. So lots of visits, mostly group, and then everybody gets to try it out individually before having an MDMA group session. And then we're planning to hold those sessions kind of like, if anyone's ever been to an ayahuasca ceremony where kind of everybody's on their own mat in their own process. And if they need help or need assistance, there will be 4 therapists in the space to support people. And so they'll kind of interact with the facilitators rather than with each other. But they'll kind of start together in like a group ceremony and then go to their individual spaces for most of the medicine piece. And then they'll come back together at the end, just kind of doing their own inner work, but in the same space together. So there's definitely a group process going on, even if people aren't speaking to or directly interacting with each other.
Yeah, and I think that's really smart to structure it like that. You had commented earlier about how the entheogens, like they serve their role, but it's the relationships where the growth really comes from. And I think that format just offers so much opportunity for personal growth, but doing it in that group setting just really gives you an opportunity to develop some skills that maybe you're really lacking, you know? And so I think that that's just a great way to approach that therapy, just, you know, given the importance. I mean, because entheogens are so great for a tool for catharsis, but it's like, if you don't have the relationship, if you don't have the community growth, you know, it's like, yeah, what are you going to do with that? You need to have people you can lean on and trust, and to begin to develop and foster those normal social behaviors that most people with PTSD struggle with. So definitely sounds like a promising study.
And then I can speak to the psilocybin trial. So that also has 2 sessions. The psilocybin trial is all individual with 2 facilitators. And I think it's a little bit more of a pragmatic study. So we're flexible with people as they go through treatment. So if, you know, the protocol right now is you have 4 prep sessions, if we feel like people aren't ready at the end of 4 prep sessions and they need another prep session or 2, then we have the flexibility to do that. But so far, everybody's had 4 prep sessions and then a psilocybin session with 25 milligrams. And it's not an exact science how that translates to like dried psilocybin mushrooms. Some people say it's like 25 milligrams would be 2.5 grams. But based on what we've seen, the question, does the client experience trips or hallucinations? Definitely. Like based on what we've seen, it seems like it's higher than 2.5 grams. Like people go pretty deep. And it can get pretty intense. And then they have 4 integration sessions. The second psilocybin session is 30 milligrams. So we go up a little bit unless there's a reason not to increase. And then they have 4 more integration sessions.
That's awesome. And so earlier you had said that there were pilot programs going at the Bronx VA, the San Francisco, and in Portland. Those are the only VAs that have programs going on right now?
There's no psychedelic studies in the San Francisco VA. UCSF,
okay.
UCSF kind of the university is doing them. And I know there are some VA faculty involved, but yeah, I think us, and then there's the Loma Linda VA has an MDMA trial that they've been doing kind of under the radar. They were actually the first. A woman named Shannon Remick started that. And then the Bronx VA is doing a big study of MDMA therapy. They're comparing protocol with 2 MDMA sessions with 3 MDMA sessions to see what the difference is there.
We had kind of talked about this before we started recording, but this is actually a conversation we were having with Donny about the use of, so, you know, when you're giving your clients entheogens, we had been asking about the use of like blindfolds and potentially binaural beats or any kind of sound frequencies, you know, and so you had kind of been sharing some of your experience with that. I was curious if you wanted to talk to that a little bit, Donny.
Sure. So we have 2 playlists. There's actually one of our research assistants that's studying, or it's his doctorate thesis is on the music. And so he put together 2 playlists. And so he's kind of studying it, like there's a whole questionnaire for the participants on that. And so we don't have actual like binaural beats, but the playlist, one of them is a little more electronic and the other one's like a little more what I would call like indigenous music, and kind of getting the participants' take on each one, which one they would prefer. So my experience, to give you all a frame of reference, the question that was originally posed to me, one of the things that I bring to this is a lot of kind of a very versatile background in meditation. So in isolation, trying to figure out, you know, my own stuff without a lot of support, I basically went on the internet and I just practiced a whole bunch of random different meditation techniques until I found stuff that stuck. And I have a little bit of ADHD, so then I got bored. You know, once I figured out the pattern, then I need something different. And so I've done like a lot of different stuff. I'm kind of like a connoisseur of meditation and things. And so that's one of the things that I bring, is just being willing to be with whatever resonates with the participant and kind of build off of that. And so we do use the blindfolds and the music with them. But I think Johns Hopkins, with their psilocybin work, they're really kind of like tuck you into the bed, put it on, and you stay there. Like you stay in your place and you don't move. And we've been a little more open with that, you know, if stuff is coming up and they don't want to stay there, come out and talk to us. And so the participant that we had wanted to talk to us a lot. And so we did practice meditation and breathing and just helping them stay in their process, but in more of an external way than like putting on the headphones and the beats. Now, in my experience, I really liked the dark. Like I laid by myself in the dark for like 6 hours for one of my really healing experiences. And that made a huge difference for me, but not everyone is like that. And different traumas, specifically, I would say maybe what we're beginning to see with something like meth, that traditionally brings a lot of fear to the table, requires like a lot of barriers and boundaries to be put up because they're safe. Their feelings of internal safety are very limited. They feel like the world is dangerous, everything's out to get them. There's a lot of paranoia. And so for them to stay in an internal place appears to be a little bit of a difficult thing because they don't trust that space at all. And so they kind of need an external experience. And so really just holding space and providing that safety and that grounded, calm environment for them really allows them to just sort of relax. And it's like you can kind of watch like boundaries just kind of dissolving, like just they become a little more open and a little more open and a little more open. And then they have like a big powerful moment where of realization, which then gets built on in integration. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. The incorporation of those little tools for myself, Alex was talking about earlier, it's just made such a big difference on our end. I know for myself, I started doing binaural beats before I even started meditating. And even with my PTSD, I noticed I was becoming just less reactionary. It was like just my day-to-day cognition was improved just from listening to that stuff. So incorporating it with entheogens has had some, pretty powerful success for me. So yeah, definitely. I have two questions here I want to throw out there, and if you guys wanted to tackle them. The first is from Celicia. She's asking, are you incorporating typical therapy models into the sessions like IFS or CBT if needed, or is it pretty strictly watching the medicine work? Do you guys incorporate any theories, or how do you guys approach that?
What's IFS?
Skills-based?
Just kidding. I'm kidding. We definitely use IFS a lot. Like internal family systems is very, very present in this space because it's a very powerful relationship builder. And it's not just a relationship with us as facilitators and the participants, it's with the participant and all of their internal relationships that are fragmented and volatile. And so finding ways to mend those relationships and model those relationships back to them is huge. I don't know what I don't know if we use CBT, but Chris and Dan can speak to that. But IFS is huge for me. So when I read that, I'm like, yes. And it's silly because without that, I don't know that I don't feel like we could get make the impact that we make without the incorporation of some amount of IFS, because it's just, it's all about helping them build those internal relationships.
During the psilocybin sessions, most of the time we're just holding space. I think we can, tap into sort of a little bit of IFS or but most of the time we're just holding space, kind of reassuring. But then around the psilocybin, so all the prep, all the integration, we're definitely using IFS where we use a lot of motivational interviewing, which I think we use in substance use clinical work, and it really kind of matches psychedelic work in general. And so that's kind of our fallback with this study. And then there's the MAPS, the organization that's doing all the MDMA assisted psychotherapy research, has a manual. And it's kind of the unmanual. It's basically kind of training therapists to get out of the way and let the person who's doing the healing do their own healing. But there are specific techniques. A lot of it came from Stan Grof's work with LSD in the 50s and holotropic breath work, and I think it's informed by some indigenous practices. But that's kind of the manual that we follow in both psilocybin and MDMA, is the MAPS MDMA assisted therapy manual, and that's online too. If you just want to Google, they have it available online.
This might be an adjacent sort of discussion or answer to this question, is that, and Donny really kind of invoked this in me, and Chris, you talked about it too. It's something that they're really beautiful with the studies, that as we're doing the work with a participant and things like I co-facilitate with Zach Skiles, he's a psychologist, and I sit there and we're doing this work too. So like while we're working with someone, we're also interacting with what comes up for us, and we're doing this work. Chris is checking our, we're having these conversations around how are we holding space, what kind of space we're bringing. And there's this real relationship that happens with like myself and Zach, where we're bringing that piece of our vulnerability, our experience. Zach's a veteran also. We sort of like in the same time, we probably ran into each other at some point in 2003. And it's this interesting experience of, we're sitting here talking about internal family systems. I really resonate with those like loyal soldiers and parts of my sub-personalities that come into play. And it's something that I think the participant sees that. I know participant sees that, and we're working on that piece. And then during the the psilocybin assisted portion, just the relationship building really came into play. And like, as I'm sitting back and experiencing this, getting called into, in this case with permissions and everything, like getting called in to hold someone's hand, like let them experience this grounding that I can offer, and then, move through this place of like, okay, I feel comfortable just letting go and moving into my experience, moving into what's coming up. And then knowing that afterward, with everything that's come up for me in that experience, like sitting back with Zach and saying, like, what came up for you? Like, what's going on? What are we interacting with? And, how best can we continue to hold space, and how best can we continue to support this person in a way that I think is beautiful for me. I was sitting there like earlier this week, felt like I was meditating with someone for like 10 hours, and also thinking how important it was for me to not move into their space in a way where I would say something, because I have a relationship with them now. Like there's this, they resonate with me and I resonate with them, like, but not bringing something into where they're sort of latching onto my archetypes or my system, and keeping their path and their journey and what they're discovering sort of unaffected by me, but knowing that I'm right there with them and I've done this work and I've been there and I'm, and we're going to do this together. Keeping their experience very, like a better word, very pure and individual, and that what comes up for them, anything that comes up is excellent. It's awesome, and holding that space. And so I just wanted to throw that in, because for me, like my passion is to, I love the science and I love everything that goes into it. I love the psychotherapy part of it, the medicine. For me, it's all about like, how do we build community? How do we build this, our own like emotional literacy? How do we come together? How do we move in this space? As a person who, struggled with PTSD and meth addiction for so long and felt outside of it, just didn't know how to do that. It's beautiful for me to like bring that energy into the space and start to build those like real relationships with somebody and allow them to move in their journey and feel heard and seen, and that their truth is excellent, beautiful. Who they are can be, they can be who they are, and they can exist as who they are.
That's awesome, man. So I do have a question. So we're talking about like what you would do in the session. What kind of work do you do with them in preparation? Do you do any like preparatory coaching or therapy, and what does that kind of look like?
So we do prep sessions prior to, I want to say integrated, Chris, what is it? Psilocybin assisted piece of it. And it's, it's something where, as I'm encountering it this last time, I'll speak to experientially, because I'm not a therapist, so I'll speak to it experientially. It was something where I was asking a lot of open-ended questions to understand what was going on with someone, like what comes with them, like where they are right now, like where barriers are, and what's going on, like what archetypes the person we're working with really resonates with archetypes and the eternal family system piece of it, and has that in there, Zach's words in their lexicon already. So we're able to use this language and start to identify like where boundaries are. So like if I'm experiencing, like if my primary archetype emotion a lot of times is it's a protector, trying to ask questions around, like what's under that, where's that coming from? And I think really for me, it's about helping someone think about what their intention is going to be when they do the psilocybin work. Like, what's the intention? What is their, in this case, like what would they like to encounter? Like, what is their hope? What's their intention around that work? And not being directive, in any way, like not pushing my own expectations, because I would hope that everyone has a very profound experience, meets their truth, calls that out, comes to this place, but allowing whatever the participants experiencing, where they're at, have that be part of that. And then also talking about what the session is going to look like, what we're going to be doing, all the way down to like, I think this is really cool. We asked someone like what they would like to eat, like if they could have anything, what kind of meal would you like to have? What kind of water would you like to have? If you ask for like physical touch, make sure we have those permissions ahead of time, like hand holding, things like that. When I come in, what makes someone feel uncomfortable, where they would like to be in the room, where just making sure those pieces are safe too. And then also I like to err on Chris when it comes to like the psychotherapy part of it. But for me as a peer, it's making the space as safe as possible and also making it as inclusive as possible, so that knowing that, whatever does come up, and I'm just not doing any directing at all. I'm not trying to put anything in there that might, like my own ideas or my own hopes or my own dreams for someone's recovery don't come into play. It just really is about holding that space for them, and however it comes up is ideal, whatever's their presence ideal, and letting the medicine do its work.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to make room for that.
I think what I want to add to that, if I can, is really helping them. There's this phrase that I've heard that I really resonate with, that we try to create, which is there's a lust for result. And so we really try to break down that expectation, especially with like some of the things, like as we've started to do this, a lot of stuff started coming out that was sort of the negatives of psychedelic work, that, you know, people have these really grandiose expectations of all the stuff that's going to work, and sometimes it's not good. And so or like sometimes their experiences are not good. And so what we really work to do is make sure that they know this might not be effective. You know, like we really say, like, this is going to be what it is, create a really strong foundation of these are the physical things you're going to experience, create the safe environment, hold space for that, really let them know exactly what's happening. So there's no, have all of the agreements in place, but then like we have 4.5-hour prep sessions before they ever go into a medicine session. And so it's really like, as those unfold, they're kind of amping up like, oh, what's this going to do? You know, like they want something to work. And so really trying to like temper that with, you know, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what you're going to experience. Like they want certainty, and we can't provide that certainty. So really opening that space up and just being like, hey, we don't know what's going to happen for you. We don't know if this is going to work for you. Like, and if you try to get really certain, that's when we can see, you know, it's probably not going to be whatever you think it's going to be. So just trying to be open, like how you sit with uncertainty the way that we're sitting with uncertainty, so that they can go into it without this like determined experience. Because when the medicine doesn't provide what you determine is supposed to provide, it doesn't tend to go really well. So trying to like help limit some of that lust for result tends to, is like a thing that we really tried to work with. Would you agree, Chris? Like any other things you could add to what we do for prep?
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it is, number one, it's building rapport. And when you look at research, therapeutic alliance is the most important factor for therapy outcomes, aside from what type of therapy you're doing, aside from how experienced the therapist is. But if you, so therapeutic alliances, you agree on the goals of what you're trying to do. You agree on the ways that you're trying to achieve those goals, and that you have trust. And so I think the third one is the hardest to establish in 4 sessions. And sometimes it doesn't get established in 4 sessions. But we put a lot of focus and have a lot of explicit conversation about that. And if they're not ready to trust, or if they're not even kind of like I think Donny alluded to, if they don't have that internal trust, it's harder for them to have external trust. And so I guess just knowing and talking about where they are in relation to trust in themselves, and trust in us, and trust in the space. We talk about trust in the medicine, that we have a lot of trust in the medicine, because we've seen kind of whatever comes up is coming up for healing. And we talk a lot about the inner healing intelligence. And so really, I think both Donny and Dan spoke to just the process that we go through to really put them in the driver's seat. I think a lot of times people come in and they're like, okay, you're the providers, like what do I do? And so really kind of handing that responsibility back to them, handing that power back to them, and really kind of making sure that they have a solid language around what their inner healing intelligence is and how it might work in a session before they go into their psilocybin session. And so, yeah, we are doing, we're getting to know kind of their symptoms, what their goals are, what their intentions are, and then helping guide them into intention without expectation. And then just like logistics. And I think when we're doing kind of like psychoeducation about the psilocybin session, we try to distinguish that from us just kind of building trust and building rapport. Like, okay, now we have just a couple of things we need to go through logistically. Is it okay if we shift into this and kind of go through the list, just so they feel prepared on the day?
I had missed this when you said it, Donnie, but Chris brought it up about the lack of internal trust. I think that's so true. Alan Watts has a quote like, if you can't trust yourself, then you literally can't trust the universe around you. And I think that really explains the relationship a lot of people who have mental health problems have with the world around them, you know, just an intense amount of distrust. Have you guys found any techniques or tactics as ways to foster trust in oneself? Or what do you do when you find yourself in that situation?
I think it really is so individual. And I think that's like, if we were to talk really in depth about each of these cases, they're all so different, and what unfolded is so different. And so it really is kind of finding the edges of their process and then just trying to develop a practice of presence. And so I think that's when meditation practices can come in handy, and just kind of, even if it's just diaphragmatic breathing, just kind of teaching them to be present with what's coming up. And then they start to trust themselves and their own process, I think, through doing that. But what comes out, like what emerges from those mindfulness moments is so different among individuals.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's like, if we go in with an expectation of, ooh, we're gonna find this person that they don't like, you know, this internal piece that they're hating, like we might be able to kind of see that sometimes, something that's fragmented. But if we go in determined to do that, then we are not trusting the process, and they're not in the driver's seat. We're trying to take the driver's seat, which is where the motivational interview, like all the stuff that we practice, really comes in, where we just sit with, okay, what's coming up? And then what, I guess the closest thing that I feel like maybe I do, but I'm sure that we all do it, like I just don't want to speak for everyone, is like kind of sitting there, like if I'm in the passenger seat, right, and if I'm not the driver of this, but I'm like assisting the driver in this, the driver's still going to go where the driver wants to go, but I might like point the flashlight somewhere, and like I'm kind of like spotting something that they're bringing up, and so I'll just kind of point a light at it, maybe by modeling, or maybe by kind of hinting towards it, you know, like in supportive language, and then allowing them to either decide we're going to go to this thing or we're going to go away from it, and then us not fighting that. Like, okay, well, what do you want to do? And if they do move towards that thing, then they're still the ones making those choices and working on those things. And sometimes it might be those things they don't trust, you know, like those relationships that are hurting, the mistrust that they have in the world. But a lot of times that trust and that mistrust is really the surface of the problem. There's a much deeper seed, like the wound is way deeper than that. And like in this work, we might be beginning to see the depths of where the wound is. And so just by looking at some of those deeper things, we're busy looking here. And then as they're working there, they'll be like, oh, this is why I feel this way about the whole world. And so it's like, instead of trying to be like, you don't trust anybody, you know, or working with it that way, it's like you find these little things that seem, I don't know, different. Like I don't know how best to describe it, but if that makes any sense at all, it's like layers of an onion. The trust is up here on the outer layer. And by going deeper into the onion, that onion just naturally begins to delayer.
Yeah, and that illustration kind of prompts another question in my mind. I know with a lot of veterans, you know, you're dealing with like legitimate trauma that most people wouldn't necessarily experience in their day-to-day lives. But I also wonder if when you look at a lot of the brokenness that vets exhibit, if it's necessarily just the combat experience that's caused it, or is it likely that there's some much deeper trauma rooted in a childhood experience or a series of over minimizations where they never learned to process trauma. And then when they're confronted with these experiences that most people never will have, they have no idea what to do with them. And they just bear these burdens poorly until it becomes essentially socially unacceptable for them to continue coping in the ways that they're coping, you know. And so I just wonder what your guys' thoughts are on that.
I want to like oversimplify it, but I really feel like you know, your question, Brian, is kind of my answer too. You know, I know for myself that, you know, being a combat veteran, having combat trauma, and then when I started doing this work for myself, and, you know, and engaging with it, then I love to peel back the onion layers. way of looking at it, because as I started to do that, there were these underlying things that were going on, even before my military experience, that were really contributing to it, and that stuff being part. And so it felt like, when I do this work, I really love the fact that these integration sessions exist, because it's something where, peeling back that onion for me, I needed to be held on the other side of that, because I was so confused. As I started to peel these things back and all the emotion came forward, I didn't really have the skills yet to understand those layers, or how I was experiencing them. And so thanks for your question, Brian. I'll turn it over to Donny or Chris. But I think experientially, it's something that I resonate with so much, that I really did experience your question as like an answer in truth.
I'll answer your question by means of my own experience. In my journey, what felt like the most important thing to work on was my military experience and my PTSD. But as I deepened into my own work, what I realized was that there was a whole lifetime of experience that influenced all of my decisions, and that I was carrying the weight of all kinds of trauma. And so with the one participant that I've worked with, but what I would really, my intuition tells me many participants that will come in the future, is that whatever the trauma of the military experience is still but a fragment of their life. And that as human beings, we experience trauma. And that doesn't mean that like every single participant, anyone who has PTSD has been sexually abused as a child, or beat up as a child, or bullied, or like that they've had these big stereotypical traumas, but that the things that they have experienced, the loss of a really important loved one, or something that they witnessed, like that there's very nuanced, subtle things that we hold, and that if we weren't held appropriately and taught to process, that we carry with us for a long period of time, influence our choices and what we do to keep ourselves and the people that we love safe. And so for many people, that might be going into the military. And so, yeah, it probably is some of that like people who've experienced certain traumas that haven't been processed, they go into the military because the military represents avenues of safety. Like they're going to be protectors, and then they experience more trauma. And so then that's all there. But when they come into this work, and I guess the way that I see people is as a human being who has experienced a lifetime worth of experiences, some of which have been traumatic, whether it's military trauma or whether it's pre or even post-military trauma. All these things have influenced their life, and they're asking for help. And so I'm not trying to get to a particular trauma. I'm just trying to, it's like, I was thinking about it. I said onion, but then I was thinking like, if I was shot, right? And if and I've been carrying this bullet inside me for a long time. You see that my arm is bleeding, and you're like, hey, your arm's bleeding. I'm like, yeah, it's fucking, like, I'm just mad, right? I'm like, stop talking about my blood. Like, this isn't the problem. I've been carrying this forever. Well, it's like getting in it and being like, hey, like, because that bullet's actually causing anger and frustration, deep rooted emotions. And so when we like go to those things, or ask about those things, right, and allow them to go to them, that's when they start pulling that bullet out. And that bullet is a whole lifetime of experience. It's not just one particular moment. It can be, sure, but I would say probably more rare that it's one event that causes all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. I think when you look at the work of like Gabor Mate and Bessel van der Kolk and stuff like that, you begin to see the cumulative nature of trauma. And the trauma doesn't need to be extreme. It can be very subtle. Gabor Mate does a really good job illustrating like just how we parent as mammals. Like no other mammal would leave their child screaming in a room for an hour and a half, not feeding it because that's what the doctor told them to do. And think about what that has on the effect of the young mammalian mind psychologically when the mother isn't outraged and isn't trying to protect them, and what kind of panic and grief that fills them with. And this is just how we raise all of our kids, so it's like, yeah, I think we've adopted some pretty poor parenting habits that almost create like inevitable outcomes of mental health issues. So yeah, it's a bit of a quagmire. We had 3 more questions from Celicia. I'll throw these out there, and whoever wants to answer can go for it. Is there any difference in the focus between the 3 VAs doing these MAP studies, protocol differences?
Yeah, I'll just say so the Loma Linda VA study was basically just a study to see if this could happen in the VA. So it's just, I think it's just open label MDMA assisted psychotherapy. And then I talked about the Bronx VA is 2 versus 3 MDMA sessions. And then our MDMA study is group therapy. So those are kind of the 3 different models being studied now. But I do know that not within the VA, but through MAPS, they do an investigator-initiated trial program where researchers can kind of collaborate with them on other studies. There's a study going on right now in Portland at the Portland Psychotherapy Clinic, MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for social anxiety disorder. And PTSD is an exclusion criteria. So if someone has PTSD, they can't be in the study. But MAPS has, I think, over 70 investigator-initiated trials like in the planning phases. So there should be a lot more research soon. And then timeline. So our studies so the psilocybin study just started a few months ago. The MDMA study is probably going to start in the new year. And then both of those studies are like 2.5 years roughly. And then usually because they're both kind of proof of concept pilot trials, they're smaller. And a lot of that is just kind of limited by budget. And then once we have effect sizes from these smaller studies, then we can design larger studies, usually multi-site trials. And then for referrals, so you can reach out through our website. I think for both of our trials, we're not really recruiting from the public necessarily. We're kind of getting referrals from clinicians in specific clinic locations. So that limits availability for those studies in the coming years, but we'll definitely have more research, hopefully soon a program implemented. And then we will be eventually we'll be training other VA providers at other VAs. But in the meantime, Measure 109 is supposed to start rolling out in 2023. Definitely take a look at Matthew Hicks' program, the Synaptic Institute, if you are wanting to become a psilocybin facilitator in Oregon. There are other programs too. I think you can go to the Oregon Health Authority website and see all the different programs. And yeah, I mean, definitely keep in touch with us. And I think as we continue to build community, it'll be a nice opportunity for referring to each other and really kind of building this out kind of on an ongoing integration model, what it looks like to have community where psychedelic experiences are normalized and integration is just part of the community.
As far as these studies that are underway, where can people keep their ear to the ground as far as results and make sure to keep tabs on these things?
Yeah, we'll eventually post those on our website. There's a lot of delayed gratification in research, so it'll probably be a couple of years, but we'll post them on our website, and then they'll be out in the world at some point.
Okay, well, I appreciate you guys so much for coming and joining us, and thank you, audience, for joining us and having some questions for us. And that's going to be a wrap for us today. And again, thanks for all for coming, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.